Hi everyone, this is an update video for Hurricane Fiona. This is Thursday evening. So we're looking at the satellite image of Fiona. This looks a lot different from yesterday. You can see a very large eye, and the eye wall is pretty apparent and uniform, but the cloud tops have warmed a little bit, meaning the cloud tops are actually quite a bit lower. And this is pretty normal when hurricanes gain latitude. They tend to expand a bit. And it's also starting to feel the influence of the upper level trough to the north. You can also see, if you can kind of make it out, there's a bit of spinning going on in this white in the eye. And actually, the very center of the storm isn't in the middle of the eye. It's a little bit to the northwest, so that's telling you the vortex is a little bit tilted. There's a bit of wind shear. So this is not a perfect storm. This is not a Category 5. This is just a pretty strong storm. And the reason that we're getting so much, or we're likely to get so much impacts, is because of the perfect setup that we're getting in the upper levels of the atmosphere over us. Category 3 Fiona, instead of weakening quickly, it's actually going to get larger, maybe even intensify in certain ways as it approaches us. It won't be considered a Category 3 hurricane necessarily. Probably a Category 1 or Category 2 post-tropical cyclone. And I got a lot of questions actually about what a post-tropical cyclone was, so I'll explain that in a little bit. But first, I want to show you guys the first official National Hurricane Center's track. Also, Canadian Hurricane Centers is very similar to this. The track is getting narrowed down to pretty much exactly where we were expecting yesterday. Just eastern Nova Scotia, so going into Canso area, Cape Breton. The cone of uncertainty has narrowed a little bit, so it's pretty much certain that it's going to hit Nova Scotia now. It's not likely to go to the east and miss Nova Scotia entirely, and it's likely not to track directly over Halifax either, so narrowing it down to eastern Nova Scotia. Environment Canada's got a bunch of statements out, so I encourage you to check that out. Of course, everything I'm saying here is just my amateur opinion, and if you want to get official information, you should get that and use that to make your decisions. But we're under quite a few warnings and watches now. Halifax area, rainfall warning, hurricane watch, and we'll be getting wind warnings, hurricane warnings, possibly tropical storm warnings at least, getting released in the next few hours. All right, so speaking of that post-tropical cyclone transition, so we hear that word and people think that it means it's going to weaken. So, post-tropical cyclone, that sounds like tropical storm. That's weaker than a hurricane, isn't it? Well, not necessarily. This is what it looks like to have a post-tropical transition. So here, let me zoom in a little bit. This is a model of Hurricane Fiona, so this is not the actual satellite image, but it looks a lot like what we were just looking at. And if I go forward in time here, you can see it evolves as a hurricane, very clear, obvious eye, and very compact area of clouds. But as we go forward here and Fiona gets closer to us, the eye starts to go away, and as it hits us, it's almost unrecognizable as a hurricane now. There's no eye wall. There's a big opening, like no clouds at all to the south and east of the storm now. And it looks like a big comma. And this is what our winter storms look like. So this is what a post-tropical cyclone is. It's simply the structure of the storm changing and the energy source of the storm becoming, instead of warm water, the energy source becomes a difference in density and difference in air masses. So we talked about that yesterday quite a bit, how the trough that's coming down is going to merge with the warm air mass of Fiona and create a lot of energy release and a deepening of the storm. And we can see that here. This is what we were looking at yesterday. Here's Fiona. Here's the upper level trough in green. Here's Nova Scotia outlined in the black. And as Fiona tracks closer, Fiona is going to merge with that upper level trough or mid-level trough and likely impact eastern Nova Scotia. All right, so here's the details now. As Fiona approaches Nova Scotia, it's looking very similar to yesterday. Not much changes. What we're focusing on here is the exact location of landfall, which is important to the east of the track, and also the location of the strongest impacts to the west. But yeah, if Fiona impacts to, anywhere to the west of the eastern edge of Cape Breton, we can expect pretty strong impacts on the eastern side of the storm, on the eastern side of Cape Breton. And that is the strongest area of winds and especially the highest risk of storm surge. So that's the concern here. And as it stands now, with Fiona hitting Canso and Port Hawkesbury area with the eye, areas to the right, like likely Lewisburg, Sydney's in that eastern area, but it's a bit protected geographically. So I'm not sure exactly what the local effects will be, but I think that'll protect you guys mostly from the storm surge and high waves. But along the eastern coast of Cape Breton is pretty worrisome here. The other area of impacts, extreme impacts, are going to be just to the west of the center. So you can see modeled on the GFS here, there's an area of pink, which is the highest winds. And this band it could change slightly to the east or to the west, but right now it's looking like it's going to stretch from around Sheet Harbor, Sherbrooke area, up through Amherst, New Glasgow, and also a lot of Prince Edward Island is probably going to get impacted by this. This is an area of very high wind gusts, probably exceeding 130 kilometers an hour, maybe 140. And it's out of the north and northwest as well, which is a pretty rare wind direction. We don't really get that strong winds very often, so the trees are not really used to that. If we get a strong storm with winds out of the south and east, the trees that are weakened already, or the trees that would have been weak have already been knocked down from storms before. So what's left is stronger storms and, natural evolution. Those stronger trees are what's left. But we don't really get strong storms from winds out of the north. So it's more likely to cause a lot more tree damage in this case. So that's a worry. Let's have a look at another model. So this is Canada's regional model. And you can see it's slightly different than the GFS. That band of high winds is slightly displaced to the east, and the center of landfall is a little bit further east as well. So that's just illustrating the differences, how this can change a little bit. But what's very consistent is there is a very strong band of winds on the west side and on the east side as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about wind impacts to Halifax. So as it stands, looking like gusts about 100, maybe 110 kilometers an hour out of the northwest. That is definitely enough to cause power outages. It's not a devastating windstorm. So as long as the storm center stays towards the east, the hope is that Halifax will escape the worst of the impacts. So right now, the highest risk areas are eastern Nova Scotia. We can talk about rainfall a little bit as well. Here, let's look at the high resolution model for the regional area. This is showing how areas in red, which are over 150 millimeters of rainfall, it's very localized areas. And it's also areas that it's enhanced by geography. So onshore winds, where air is piling up and causing rising air, that enhances rainfall. So northern coast of Nova Scotia, and especially the Cape Breton Highlands. These are areas that can get over 150 millimeters, maybe over 200 millimeters of rain. But in general, widespread areas of about 100 millimeters are pretty expected. Anywhere Halifax on east is pretty likely to experience a pretty high rainfall. And it's in a short period of time as well, about 6 to 12 hours, and near landfall, that'll be near and just before landfall is the highest rainfall areas. So that's pretty much it, guys. I wanted to keep it pretty short here. Happy to discuss in the Reddit thread I'll post if anyone has any questions. But that's pretty much it. Stay safe. Watch for the official tracks. Know that if it shifts a little bit west, the impacts will shift west as well, especially into Halifax. So keep that in mind. If the impacts shift east, that's pretty much a good thing for the most of Nova Scotia, except for areas that are worried about that strong western impact. So if it shifts east more, Amherst, Port Hawkesbury are more in the impacts, but it would kind of save Halifax, for example. So, the fine details do matter here, but they're pretty much impossible to predict. It's good to be prepared for anything, but I'll give you guys an update tomorrow and let you guys know if the westward shift happens or eastward shift. But at the moment, these are the impacts we're looking at. And yep, talk to you guys later. Have a good night and stay safe.